Picture this: a room in Florida, bathed in the faint glow of monitors. The most powerful man on the planet is watching a live feed. He's seeing his army, thousands of miles from home, closing in on a target. Now, according to the source material we're looking at today, this isn't some Hollywood blockbuster. It's a hypothetical scenario of what could really happen.
So, the scene is set. It's January 3rd, 2026. The clock ticks past 2 a.m., and a secret military operation is just moments away from its final critical stage. And we're not talking about just any target here. No, the objective is the elected president of a sovereign nation fast asleep in the presidential palace with absolutely no idea what's coming.
According to our source, the U.S. president later described watching the whole thing unfold with those chillingly simple words. So today we're going to break down this hypothetical military raid piece by piece. We'll look at how it could have happened, why it happened, and most importantly, what it could mean for all of us.
Okay, so let's pull back the curtain on the operation itself. Codename, Operation Absolute Resolve. The source says this wasn't some last-minute decision. Nope, this was months of meticulous planning, all leading up to this one complex, high-stakes assault on Venezuela's capital city.
It all went down in 4 key stages. First, the infiltration. U.S. helicopters skimmed just 100 feet over the ocean, flying under the radar. Then, boom, a cyber attack hits, and the entire city of Caracas is plunged into total darkness. With the city blind, airstrikes take out all radar and air defense systems. And that clears the way for the final step, the assault. Elite Delta Force commandos rappel right onto the roof of President Nicolas Maduro's palace.
And the whole thing, it was over in a flash. From the moment those commandos breached the building to the second they had the president in custody, just 5 minutes. That's it. He was captured, whisked away to a nearby U.S. warship, and flown straight to American soil.
You know, something this big, this audacious, it really leaves you with 2 massive questions. First, why on earth would the United States do something like this? And second, what does it mean for the world if the leader of any country can just be snatched from their bed? Let's start with the why. So the first part of that why is the official story, the reason the world was given for this unprecedented move. The public justification had nothing to do with war or politics. No, it was all framed as a simple law enforcement action.
See, the claim was that the President Maduro wasn't a head of state. He was an indicted drug trafficker. He was facing a whole slate of serious charges in a New York court: narco-terrorism, conspiracy to import cocaine, weapons possession. The U.S. was basically saying he was an international criminal, and they were just bringing him to justice.
But according to the source material we're looking at, that whole drug narrative, it was just a cover story. The real prize, the true motivation, wasn't drugs at all. It was about a resource that has defined the U.S.-Venezuela relationship for 100 years: oil.
And this right here, this is the heart of the argument. Venezuela is sitting on the largest proven crude oil reserves on the entire planet. Just look at this chart. Over 300 billion barrels. That is more than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran, and way more than the United States has.
And you really can't understand this without looking back at the history. For decades after oil was discovered there in 1922, U.S. companies were all over it. But everything changed in the early 2000s when President Hugo Chavez came to power. He nationalized the entire oil industry, kicked out the American companies, and took state control. The U.S. hit back with sanctions, and things have been tense ever since.
And if there was any doubt about the real motive, the source points to what President Trump allegedly said the very next day. He supposedly didn't talk about fighting crime or promoting democracy. He talked about oil, saying that Venezuela had taken it away from the U.S.
So let's just lay it all out. On one side, you have the official story about drugs, which the source argues is pretty weak. Venezuela isn't even a major supplier to the U.S. But on the other side, you have this incredibly powerful argument for oil. The U.S. needs Venezuela's specific type of crude, and right now, America's biggest rival, China, is the one buying most of it. Okay, so you pull off a move like this, you better believe the world is going to react. And it did, immediately. The source describes a massive global condemnation of the raid, and not just from the usual suspects, but from close allies, too. Nations all over Latin America and Europe, we're talking Brazil, Mexico, Spain, they got together and issued a joint statement. They called the raid a dangerous precedent for a rules-based international order. Even the UN Secretary General apparently called it a clear violation of the UN Charter. But it wasn't just international law that was an issue.
The source argues this operation actually broke America's own rules. You see, under the U.S. Constitution, the president can't just decide to go to war or send in troops. That requires approval from Congress. And for this, Congress was never even asked.
Now, the administration's comeback to all this was pretty simple. They said, hey, this wasn't war, it was just law enforcement. We were arresting a criminal. But does that story really hold up when you look at the facts?
Well, let's see. The operation involved over 150 military aircraft, fighter jets, special ops planes launched from 20 different bases. I mean, does that sound like serving a warrant to you? And it gets even more serious. The source claims that the initial airstrikes that were needed to knock out the city's defenses killed 40 people. That's not law enforcement. That is an act of war.
So this all leads us to the biggest question of all, the so what? What does an action like this actually mean for the future? I mean, if one country can just decide to invade another and grab its leader, calling it law enforcement, what happens to the whole idea of a stable, predictable world? And here's the real kicker: accountability. The most powerful countries on the UN Security Council, like the US, China, and Russia, they all have veto power. That means they can just block any attempt to hold them accountable. So the source asks, if the US can do this without consequences, what's to stop China or Russia from doing the exact same thing?
Our source pretty much sums up this potential new reality with this bleak philosophy. It suggests we're heading towards a world where international law is just something that applies to countries that aren't powerful enough to ignore it.
And that's the thought I really want to leave you with. What kind of world are we creating when all the old rules of diplomacy and respect for sovereignty get thrown out the window, replaced by the simple, brutal logic of who has the biggest army?